Hello folks, welcome to El Canal Channel Jose. Today we're going to talk a little bit about what means interference engine and not interference engine. And there's two different types. What's the difference between these two engines? And with that, we're going to talk a little bit about it so you can understand why do they mean by that. So for an engine to operate properly, it needs to be timed, and it has to be timed correctly, because that means that components internally are synchronized. So everything on the bottom of the block and the top are synchronized by a component. That component is a timing belt, a timing chain, or sometimes even gears. So that those components, their job is to keep the top and the bottom end synchronized, so the pistons, as they move in the upper part as well, they don't collide when they're operating. So it's called timing, so everything works properly. So why is the timing belt so important? Well, that keeps all the engines synchronized, so everything on timing, so the engine works properly. Because if this timing belt breaks, what's going to happen, that's when your engine comes to if it's interference or not interference engine. So what that means, if it's interference or not interference, if it's interference engine, what's gonna happen if the timing belt breaks and then the pistons, for example, the timing belt rips, and now the crankshaft where the pistons are attached to keeps spinning, and the camshaft, which is the upper part of your engine, stops spinning, and then the valves are exposed and then the piston comes up. If it's a non-interference, what that means is that even if there's no timing belt, if the bottom end or the pistons are going up and down, it's not going to touch your valve. So there's going to be no internal damage. All you're going to have to do is just put the engine back on timing and then put the timing belt on, and you'll be safe. On our Tercel, that happened to us. The timing belt broke off, and then the car kept running for a little bit. We stopped it, and we found out that this engine is not an interference engine. So that means that the pistons, even if they're moving and the valves are stuck open, they're never gonna reach, and there's gonna be no collision between pistons and valves, so there's not gonna be any damage internally. So all we did, we just put we put the engine on timing again, piston bottom end and top end, and we put the new belt on, got it back on the road. But if it's an interference engine, what's going to happen once the timing belt breaks, or the chain or the gears, something comes out of place, and that the bottom end keeps spinning for the crankshaft. So if the crankshaft keeps spinning and those pistons are still going up and down, and the head stops spinning because now one part is moving and the other part is not rotating and nothing is synchronized, what's going to happen is that the pistons, as they're coming up, those valves are going to be open, and then the piston is going to come up to where it needs to come up, but the valve is in its way, so it's going to hit it like a hammer, and it's going to bend those valves, and it might even create more damage than that. It might damage the head, it might damage some pistons, so that's going to be a really bad internal damage for that engine. The worst scenario that can happen, that engine can ruin itself. So the timing belt is being spun by the crankshaft, and then there's everything synchronized. So the bottom end and the top end is being spun by the timing belt. That's why it's timing. But if that timing belt rips, the pistons are gonna keep on moving because they're engaged with the transmission. So now what's gonna happen, the camshaft is gonna stop, and what this camshaft does, it has a high points and low points on the camshaft. So depending on the location, if that high point is facing down, that valve is pretty much gonna be open. So if that stop at that area and these high points are facing down, that means that those valves that are in the cylinder are going to be open. So when the piston is coming up and the valves open, what's going to happen is like a hammer hitting a nail. But because this is being stopped by this, it's going to hit hard, and it's going to bend or damage the piston as it hits each other. So that's why the interference engines are so critical on having them with a good timing belt chain or gears. So that's what happens when the crankshaft stops and the belt rip. So now you got these exposed to the pistons as they move up and down, because they're engaging, they're still spinning, and the upper part is not spinning. So there's going to be damage. So if that piston is coming up and that cylinder has those valves open because that camshaft, what's going to happen, that piston is going to hit those valves and it's going to bend them like a nail. So that's what's going to happen. So make sure that you find out if your engine is an interference or not interference engine, because if it's not an interference engine, if that belt breaks, at least you have a peace of mind that that engine might be safe. But if it's an interference engine, that's gonna cost you a lot of money because of that belt that broke or that chain or those gears. So make sure that if it's an interference engine, you want to do an inspection on your belt and see if it needs to be replaced. And if it has a lot of miles on it, over 100,000 miles, and you have never replaced the timing belt, you might want to do the job, because that's going to save you a lot of money in the future. And that's going to also save your valves and a lot of components. So that means more money in your pocket just by replacing a simple belt that is going to take a little bit less work than replacing an engine. On our Tercel, we had a belt break on us, but we knew that it was a non-interference engine. So when that belt broke, we knew that we could just take the car back home, take the old belt out of there, put the new belt, put it on timing, and get it back on the road. But in other cases, it might be a sad scenario. So make sure you do that, those maintenance as well. Change your oil and change and verify if the belt needs to be replaced. And well, folks, hopefully this info is useful and helpful. That way you can find out if your engine is interference or not interference, so you can start by replacing the timing belt, and if you haven't replaced it, so that can save you a lot of money and a lot of headaches. And if it's not an interference engine on your car, well, at least you know, and that way you can have some more peace of mind in case the belt breaks. But I would start replacing the belt if you have a lot of miles on it, like over 100,000. You want to replace the belt, so that way you can have your engine and your car in the road for longer. And with that said, for folks who are watching our video haven't subscribed to our channel, please subscribe. If you like our video, give us thumbs up, share it, and we'll see you soon with more videos here en el canal El Chano Jose.